Hello and welcome to the Rabblecast. My name is Eric Hernandez and you are officially listening to episode number 601. I thought about renumbering the show, like doing a relaunch of number 1 or volume 2 or version 2. I held off. If I relaunch the show, it'll be something major down the line. We'll see what happens. But for now, I wanted to hold on to the numbering system. It just makes it easier as far as continuity. If you have not listened to the previous 600 episodes or 15 years, don't worry. This is going to be just as easy for an old listener or a loyal listener as well as a new listener. I want everybody to be able to jump in and have the show be accessible to everybody. So if you haven't been listening for years or episodes, don't worry about it. You can go back and check them out. But going forward, it's easy to jump in at any point in time and say, hey, look, I like this show and I like what they talk about and some of the topics that they discuss. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible. At the same time, I'm also trying to find ways to expand the reach of the show through different platforms, different pages that we hit. So I'll be making some tweaks to the show as far as updating, posting, and we'll see what happens as far as that's concerned. I don't want to do it all at once because I don't want to screw something up royally and not be able to go back or revert. So I'm trying to do like baby steps here and there. So we'll see what happens. Before we get into the topics of this episode, I want to make not a shout out. I want to make a mention of somebody that I did not talk about last episode in returning to the studio. And that is somebody who's been very, very important to the show. Jimmy, who is a dear friend of mine. He was my best man at my wedding. At one point in time, when Doug and I were recording the show together, we were looking for different spaces that would accommodate us as far as whether his place, my place, whatever the case was, whatever made it easier for us to get together and talk and go over different episodes or different subjects. Jimmy at that point in time had a studio space for his photography setup, and he allowed us to invade it. He set up the microphones and pretty much just hung out with us. Now, after a few episodes, it was like, dude, just jump in. Like, there's no reason for you not to talk. You're already here with us. Just set up another microphone if you don't mind and go for it. Jimmy would record the file. When we were done recording, he would send the file over to me. He'd email it to me. And we'd go from there. We'd go out to the diner and have some fun. So the fact that I left out Jimmy's name last episode when I was talking about all the different people and the rundown of people who've been on the show and helped out, I feel like a complete jackass for leaving his name out. And it was pointed out to me by Doug when he and I were going back and forth at one point. And I was like, fuck, I'll rectify that in the episode. I didn't mention it in the episode itself because I was rambling on for so long with the subject material. So I wanted to make sure that I re-record this intro and mention him because Jimmy, you are a very important part of my life and you were very integral to the show at one point. So thank you so much for what you've done. In fact, when you listen to this show, once I'm done doing this spoken bit for the intro music is a creation by Jimmy himself. I gave him a few different suggestions of what I was looking for, and he was able to help me out. He gave me a few different samples of what he came up with, and I settled on the guitar intro, which I love to this day. I've been using it for quite some time now. So thank you, Jimmy, once again. I apologize for leaving out. It's completely fucked up of me to do it, but I hope that this in some small way corrects that wrong, and hopefully we'll get together sometime in the future. We can sit down, talk, maybe even put a recorder in front of us and just tell some great stories and enjoy being in one another's company again. Miss you, brother. I'll talk to you soon. With that said, on this episode, I talk about the recent passing of director, producer, story writer, or just writer, Richard Donner. If you're not familiar with Richard Donner, he has a long list of movies he's worked on. The Goonies, the Lethal Weapon franchise, Maverick, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, Superman. I get into it, I gush about him, I get into some of the story and history of Superman, Superman 2. If you haven't seen a Richard Donner film, go look one up. I'm sure that there's something that he has done that you might enjoy. I didn't realize just how much he had worked on in the past decades that I'd watched unknowingly, was watching a Richard Donner feature or film or episode. The Goonies is another one that I talk about, which was very, very important for me growing up. It was one of those cool little adventure movies for a bunch of kids facing like dire consequences. It was interesting to watch. So for me to go back and enjoy, realize what I'd watched and what I'd seen and what had influenced me, Richard Donner has a huge hand in the stuff that I watched growing up. So thank you, sir. I very much appreciate it. On this episode, I also talk about the recent Marvel Studios release of Black Widow. Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh, David Harbour, and Rachel Weisz. I try not to spoil some of the movie, but I do get into some details here and there. There are spoilers for Infinity War and Endgame. If you haven't seen it already, well, it's been quite some time. What are you doing? I do spoil the ending scene, the bonus scene of Black Widow. So if you haven't seen it yet, be ready for that one. Aside from that, I go over the movie itself and the crazy fact that a year plus since its delay due to the pandemic. So we'll see what happens. There's also probably going to be a follow-up on Black Widow because of the way it's performing at the box office. Had a great initial showing, and then the second week is a sharp decline. So not particularly for this movie, but movies that are being released currently in this whole streaming era as simultaneous release with the theaters. So we'll see what happens with that. So we'll get into a bunch of that and more. With that said, we are brought to you by InsidePulse.com. You can find us under the podcast section. You can also find the show over at Rabblecast.libsyn.com. That's where it usually posts in general. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Rabblecast. Send us an email, rabblecast@gmail.com. I say at the end of this episode, if you have any Richard Donner stories or any stories in general that you want to talk about, or if I missed anything, if I started rambling and left the talking point off and like, hey, could you go back to that? Okay, maybe I can send you an email and see what we can do with following up or just tying up that loose end. Send it to me. Let me know what's going on. I want to hear from you guys. I want to see that you guys are listening. Numbers only mean so much on my dashboard. I want more interaction. So Twitter, Facebook, email, send it over. We'll see what else we can come up with. Again, I'm making tweaks to the show. We'll see what happens, how it all plays out. Otherwise, enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome once again. One of the hardest things about doing the show by myself is trying to figure out a way how to start. I've gone through like 3 different beginnings or takes, if you would, and I just don't know. It's hard when you don't have somebody to bounce off of as far as a conversation and just talking points. Hopefully, we can rectify that in a little while. But tonight, I would like to talk about a very special individual, and I say special only because if you look at his body of work, it's astounding. And for me, who enjoys a lot of different movies, shaped a lot of the different things that I saw. I'm talking about the late great Richard Donner, or Dick Donner, director, producer, and you name it, he has been all over the place. I'm gonna go to the trusty Wikipedia page because, let's face it, it's what I have to work off of for the time being. You can look up the information wherever you like, but this is a pretty simple and concise summary, and I'll get more into his body of work. Let's see. Richard Donner was an American filmmaker whose notable works included some of the most financially successful films of the 70s and 80s. Donner was one of Hollywood's most reliable makers of action blockbusters. This is a very important point that they make here. His career spanned over 50 years, crossing multiple genres and filmmaking trends. Donner began his career as a television director, helming episodes of series like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Fugitive, and The Twilight Zone. Right there alone, that's some interesting variety. He made his film debut with the low-budget aviation drama X-15. I don't think I've ever seen that one. That one came out in 1961, it says here. But he had his critical and commercial breakthrough with the horror film The Omen. He directed a landmark superhero film, Superman, obviously, which I actually have in the background. Funny enough, Marlon Brando, currently on my TV screen back there. Starring Christopher Reeve, and went on to direct films such as The Goonies, Scrooged, while reinvigorating the buddy film genre with the Lethal Weapon film series, which, up until recently, it was rumored that they were going to make another entry into the franchise. I don't know if that's going to happen now with his passing. It's very unfortunate. But he and his wife, producer Lauren Schuler Donner, own the production company, the Donner's Company, formerly Donner Schuler Donner Productions. Best known for producing the Free Willy and X-Men franchises, Donner also produced Tales from the Crypt television series and co-wrote several comic books for Superman publisher DC Comics. In 2000, he received the President's Award from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films. Now, you're probably saying, well, all right, another director, another producer, big whoop. Just listen to some of the different films he's worked on. It's fucking astonishing. So, pardon my language. I'm amazed because I didn't really realize just how prolific his career was. And it's gonna live on for decades, if not, hundreds of years, however long mankind exists on this planet. I mean, we're going to remember the work of Dick Donner. It's quite amazing. The Omen, Superman 2. There's a very interesting little story. I'll get into some of that in a little bit. Let's see here. Inside Moves. They did do a Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, which was released a while back. I never actually got a chance to pick it up, but that's something I will touch on. The Toy with Richard Pryor, Lady Hawk, The Goonies. Let's see. Lethal Weapon, Scrooge, Lethal Weapon 2, Two-Fisted Tales, Radio Flyer, Lethal Weapon 3, Tales from the Crypt, Maverick with Mel Gibson, which is a fun movie before Mel Gibson went a little cuckoo. Assassins, starring Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas. Conspiracy Theory, Lethal Weapon 4. Let's see what else we got here. Timeline, 16 Blocks. I mean, this is just a smattering of all the different things he's worked on. And I mentioned him because I didn't realize, like, I've heard the name Richard Donner. It's one that's come up time and time again. You hear it of different directors from the 80s and 70s around that time. Like Spielberg obviously is a very notable director. He's very famous for what he's done in his career. But Donner, after a while, I feel like Donner's name kind of got quiet in a sense, because he was a very reliable hitmaker when it comes to blockbusters, but I don't think many people really I don't know, what's the way I could put this? He was so famous that you really didn't hear much as far as stories, or maybe because, social media and the internet really wasn't around the time that he was really, really busy. And he really kept out of any big news stories. I was listening to an episode of Kevin Smith, Fat Man Beyond, with Kevin Smith and Mark Bernardin. And I believe it was Mark Bernardin who brought the story to the podcast, saying that the actor who played Chunk in The Goonies, years down the line, he was going back to school and trying to figure out what he wants to do in life, and he was trying to pay for his way to get into school. Wasn't asking for a handout, called up Dick Donner and his wife and asked if it's possible to get a letter of recommendation written for him for the school, just so make it look nice on his resume or application, as it were. And Dick Donner apparently said, yeah, sure, just send me over whatever points you want me to cover and whatever you want me to hit, and yeah, I'll be glad to do that for you. Dick Donner was really nice. He kept in touch with a lot of the kids from the Goonies, which was a nice little thing to do back in the day. Especially sometimes Hollywood, once they use you, they use you up and spit you out, and you really don't. Unless you know somebody, you really don't get a chance to advance your career, and sometimes it can get unfortunate. That's where we hear a lot of child actors sometimes just don't go far, really don't make it, make a big career out of it in recurring roles. I honestly can't remember what else the actor who played Chunk was, whatever else he's been in the year since, but he has since become a entertainment lawyer, so don't feel bad for him. But back to the story real quick. So Dick Donner gets the bullet points essentially that he wants covered for the referral letter, and after reading all the different points and the struggle that the actor had to go through growing up and being a child actor, and how he's hoping to better himself through going to the school. I don't remember what school it was off the top of my head, but Dick Donner was so moved by the different points in the story that he and his wife apparently paid for Chunk to go to school for college, which made a huge difference in his life, and I'm sure he probably owes him a very big debt of gratitude. But it was just one of those cool things where it's like, yeah, I could help you, but why don't I just, help you out even more than what you're asking? He wasn't like the story. The fact that he was just reaching out to Donner and saying, hey, could you help me out and just write a letter? And Dick Donner just turned around and goes, fuck, I can do more than that here. And just paid his way, fully believing that the kid had what it took to go on and, make his dreams come true. And he did. It's a great little story. And there's been a lot of different stories that have been coming out of Hollywood and a lot of the different news sites referring to Donner, Richard Donner and his wife. Just, they seem to be such a great inspirational couple through their company, through their work. It's astounding to hear such an uplifting story, even though we lost such a great gentleman. Let's see here. He passed on July 5th at the age of 91. Again, maybe it's because he just decided to take a back seat for a lot of the different things. Didn't want to be involved in a lot of the different going on day to day. He had his production company. The production company did its whole thing. The X-Men franchise was very big for them. Free Willy back in the day, if you remember the whale movie, it was quite interesting. I honestly don't think I watched Free Willy. I know I was in a room when it was being played. It just wasn't up my alley, so to speak. But through all the different movies that he has in his body of work, it's very, very interesting to go through and see all the different genres, all the different types of movies, horror, action, sci-fi. He was known to be very reliable, and there was a very specific reason for that, and that was that he wasn't looking to make the best action movie or the best sci-fi movie. He just was looking to tell the best story, which is something that was very, very interesting, because when it comes to Hollywood, you have your directors or your filmmakers that are very pigeonholed when it comes to what kind of movies they can make and what they will work on. But for Dick Donner, I just read through his accomplishments or his filmography, and it's interesting to see just what he was able to create in that body of work. I mentioned before, there was an interesting story for Superman 2. The Superman film franchise, I believe it was the Salkind family that bought the rights for Superman back in the day, which is really an interesting story in of itself, and I'm going to touch on it a little bit here and there. So I'm watching Superman 1 in the background right now, and they had Marlon Brando, Christopher Reeves, Gene Hackman, obviously, Margot Kidder. An amazing, amazing movie. The tagline that I remember reading, granted, this came out before I was born, I believe, sometime in the 70s, but the tagline was, "You will believe a man can fly." And when I watched this growing up, I think it was like on the Sunday afternoon movie, whatever the case was at that point in time, I remember watching it, and for the scenes where we see Superman actually fly on screen, they didn't have the sophisticated technology that we have nowadays. People say, oh, green screen, just put a green screen up and we'll just CGI. They had to come up with some interesting ideas. I'm sure they had some form of green or matte screen paintings, whatever the case was, how they made the illusion or the effect worked on film. But they didn't have all the different computer gimmicks that we have nowadays. So they really had to work for it and make it believable on film. And this is a huge undertaking when you think you've got to make Superman believable on the big screen. We have had Superman in animated form. We've had Superman on the small screen with George Reeves, the old black and white Superman, and then years later we had different iterations on TV and movies. But Christopher Reeve portrayed a very, very iconic character in the sense that this was the first big shot. Like we got this big blockbuster of a superhero film. It was a standalone. He was in his own world, his own universe at the time. You didn't have Batman and Wonder Woman and all the other ones sharing the screen. This was Superman by himself. The story of a little baby being shot off of Krypton is about to blow up. It's about to come to its own demise for whatever reason. And the baby's being shot out in this rocket. It's going to be landing on Earth and in the farmlands in Smallville, and the Kents are going to raise him and teach him right from wrong, and how justice should prevail, and give him this upbringing that's just going to teach him like how to be an upstanding citizen. Back in the old days, it used to be referred to as truth and justice in the American way. Well, Superman's become a much more global, international character in the sense that it's truth, justice, and just standing for what's right. But for the movie, Dick Donner did a really, really amazing job putting it together, making it all work on the big screen. And the idea was then that they wanted to shoot Superman 1 and 2 back to back. This is what the interesting part of the story was. But for whatever reason, the Salkind family got very fucking weird with the whole thing. Granted, you pay your money, you're invested in the film, so you want to make sure the film goes a certain way, it looks a certain way, whatever the case was. And this is what happens with producers and directors and studios and whatever the case is. We've said it before, it's amazing that anything gets done or made in Hollywood at all, whether it be TV or movies, because there's so many different people with their hands in the cookie jar, or hands in the soup, so to speak. And they didn't like how the film was progressing, I guess. They wanted to try to shore up their bottom line a little bit. So they essentially fired Dick Donner, even though he had the second film practically filmed. I think it was like somewhere like 75 to 90% was done filming. You can look up the story and go over the fine details. I'm just going over brief bullet points here. And the idea was they didn't like how the film was progressing. There were some problems with some of the actors and the production overall. I think Margot Kiddo at one point had some not so kind words about the Salkinds. Gene Hackman filmed a bunch of different scenes for Superman 2, but I guess because they weren't getting along so well that he wouldn't come back for reshoots, so they had to work whatever they had. Marlon Brando, apparently it just cost a lot of money to get him to do anything back in the day. He was the guy in Hollywood. So it was amazing that he was in the movie to begin with. But the second movie was retooled under a different director, and it was really weird how, like, the story back then, it was kind of known and not really known. Again, there was no real big social media. There was no big news sites out there covering the story as well. You had to wait for it to come out in different magazine form. And I think it was like Starlog and some of the other ones that came out. And they would cover some of the different stories. You would hear the hoopla behind the scenes or backstage, whatever the case was. And even though with that, years later, somewhere like early 2000s, I want to say it was, because I remember going into Best Buy back when they had like the big DVD section, like rows of DVDs, aisles of DVDs, which is hard to find nowadays. But I remember seeing the case for the Donner cut of Superman 2, and I never picked it up, but I'm going to have to hunt it down. I'm going to see if they have it maybe on HBO Max. That's where I'm currently streaming this in the background. And I want to see what was done differently. I never even read up on it to see how the movie itself played out. The first Superman film is a lot of fun. You see the struggle between Superman and Lex Luthor, and they meet up and everything case. But the second film was always kind of odd, in a sense. They changed it up a little bit, and they had to reshoot a bunch of different scenes because they wanted to take Donner's name off the film altogether. I'm blanking on the director's name that replaced Donner, but it was very, very interesting to see how it all played out. And apparently when people saw the Donner cut, I mean, nowadays you got the Snyder cut for Justice League that was released on, again, HBO Max, was a huge film that everybody enjoyed, and that was fun in of itself. I don't think I ever got a chance to talk about it. No, you know what? In fact, the last episode before like the big hiatus was I was talking about HBO Max and kind of like making sense of all the different craziness that was going on at the time. Because then, year previous, we were talking about, or at least I was talking about, and the news was referring how to the Snyder cut, like the big petition of let's release the Snyder cut. Let's see what he really made for Justice League, not the Joss Whedon version. It wasn't unheard of for a director to have filmed different takes, different scenes, different pacing for film. And then for us to finally get to see it, the true vision of what the director wanted. Again, we got to see it with the Snyder cut for Justice League, which some people liked. Some people didn't. I saw a lot of different things in the Snyder Cut of Justice League. You can see why it would be cut out, but at the same time, you can see why it would be left in, because he's filming from an artistic viewpoint, and he's trying to portray, the comic book panel to the big screen. So it was a give and take. If you love the source material, then you definitely will love the extended cut, because it just gives you more of the characters and more of what you'll love. Granted, it's in that darker, grittier Snyder universe for the DC films, but it was fun nonetheless. And the changes that were made were amazing compared to what was released with the Joss Whedon version. But getting back to the Superman film, the idea that he had already filmed part 2 practically all the way, but that this all kinds of like, nah, let's cut our losses, let's do this, let's do that, and they just monkeyed around with everything and had switched everything all around. And Dick Donner, what's he gonna do? All right, whatever. He just moves on with his life, and not like he suffered. Not at all. He went on to make so many different films and work with so many different people. I can't even remember what the Salkinds really did after the fact. I know they held on to the movie rights for quite some time, and it wasn't until they got around to Superman Returns with Brandon Routh that things were getting worked out and the kinks were just still being moved back and forth. Whatever the case is, Marvel has a lot of different problems when it comes to movie rights. They still are suffering with Sony holding onto the rights of certain characters and still trying to play nice so that we can not only give the fans what they want, but we can also get the appropriate story on the big screen. I refer mostly right now to Spider-Man and how Sony's trying to expand their Spider-Verse, as it were, with Spider-Man, Venom, Morbius. There's a Kraven the Hunter movie coming out. So there's a bunch of different things that they're trying to work with, because anything that falls under the Spider-Man umbrella, Sony has the rights to, as far as films are concerned, but Marvel has the majority of their movie rights back at this point. I know they got back Daredevil, they got Punisher. I believe Ghost Rider has reverted back to them as far as the films are concerned. So everything's starting to fall back into place for them. But back in the 70s and 80s, things were, you didn't have these big movie franchises as far as superheroes were concerned. Like, we talk about how you had the Justice League. It would have been cool, and there's little pieces of artwork that kind of give you a what if or what could have been. Alex Ross, who is a phenomenal artist, he does a lot of paintings that are covers or murals, very, very lifelike. He gets people to model costumes and pretty much play as reference points for him as he does these amazing pieces of artwork. He has done pictures or portraits of, it's like Batman and Robin in the old Batman 66 Batmobile racing down the road, and there's Superman flying above them. It's, I believe it's the George Reeve version that I saw in the one painting. Or there's another one where they show it's Batman and Robin, or excuse me, Batman from the Michael Keaton movie with Wonder Woman, the Linda Carter version, and Christopher Reeves, and, Wesley Shipp, I believe the actor's name was for the Flash 90s TV show, which he played Barry Allen, I believe it was, and he had the weird foam muscle suit for the red Flash costume, which you look back on it, it's a little weird, a little out of proportions, but at the same time, it was what we had at the time. It looked great. You saw that costume for the first time on the screen, you're like, oh man, that's amazing. I love the old 90s Flash TV show. It was a guilty pleasure for me. But again, you didn't have that big team up for DC back in the day. Everything existed in its own little film universe, its own little pocket universe. So if you had Batman movies, if you had Superman movies, we didn't have a Wonder Woman movie for quite some time. So that lagged far behind all the others. And then Marvel obviously did their thing. But for Donner, it was one of those things that really played out for him. And then again, as we said before, because he was able to take just about any movie or any story and make it the best version of itself, we had all the other movies. The Goonies. The Goonies was an amazing film. If you haven't seen The Goonies, I don't know who listens to the show currently. If you're an older audience member, obviously around my age, I'm 40. you should be familiar with The Goonies. A fun movie. Let me give you a quick rundown from when I can remember that off the top of my head. A bunch of kids who live down in the Goondocks, and they're about to lose their home. They're being forced to move out because there's people buying up the land. So the one kid decides he wants to try to find out if he can find the mythical treasure of One-Eyed Willie, a pirate that was known to have hidden the treasure in the cave somewhere around the Goondocks. And he embarks on this little trip with his friends, and his brother's trying to stop him because he's supposed to be watching out for his little brother, and the girl that he likes is also there, and all this little group, the Goonies, as they're referred to as, go on this weird roller coaster adventure, trying to find this treasure. But at the same time, they're on the run from the Fratellis, which is a little mob or crime family that recently just broke out of prison, and they catch wind of the treasure, and they're like, oh, well, we're going to get that ourselves, and not only that, but we're going to get rid of the kids because they can't know that we're here, otherwise we're in trouble. Again, I'm paraphrasing all this is off the top of my head. The whole idea of Sean Astin's character relentlessly trying to save his family's home, his not wanting to move, so he has to go away from his friends, and it's such a great film. I mean, then you have Sloth, the deformed sibling of the Fratellis that was kept in a basement, chained up and watching TV all day. Chunk, who I mentioned before, who is really just the comedy relief of the bunch, but comes through and saves him at the end of the day. It was a great story put together for any kid back in the day in the 80s. It was like that cool adventure story. You loved going on that adventure with the Goonies. And that was the magic of what Richard Donner did. I mean, you got all these elements that came together so well, and it told an amazing story. Again, if I go through the list of films, I can find a whole bunch of different things. I could probably pick one or two films and talk about them at length, because I watched so many of them growing up that they stuck with me. Lady Hawk, Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the other name. I'm gonna look it up. I can't because I'm right here. Was another one. It's astounding the amount of work that he did, and will continue to survive even past him being with us. Let's see, Matthew Broderick, Rutger Hauer. That's who I was thinking of. Interesting story, metamorphosis of a character into a bird. And if you haven't seen any Richard Donner movie, go back. I mean, granted, it's a different time, 70s and 80s. Some things probably don't play as well currently as they would have back then. It always comes up with people say, oh, well, you can't make that movie nowadays. Okay, certain elements, understandable. Different time, different place, different world, really. I mean, if you talk about 2021 compared to 70s and 80s, definitely things have changed. Things have matured, I would hope, progressed to better points, better heights. But again, Donner, an amazing director, and I could not believe it when I heard that he had passed. It was I know we talk about it every now and then, and Doug and I would always joke about it. Same thing with other co-hosts or hosts, that every now and then when somebody dies, I mean, granted, life takes its life progresses. Life has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's just the way it goes. But it's always sad to hear when somebody passes away, especially somebody who's brought so much joy and so much entertainment in the world of Hollywood in particular. But I was surprised. Like, I knew Richard Donner was still alive. I heard about him every now and then. Again, the Donner cut and everything else. But when the news broke that he had passed away, it was a very somber moment. But then all of the stories, like I mentioned before, of his kindness, of the people that knew him, just started flooding all the different news sites. And it was such a relief to see such a great remembrance of somebody who worked so diligently in the business. So it was sad to see him go, obviously. But at 91, what a fucking life, man. I can only imagine what he's seen, what he saw, what he did. behind the scenes, the different ideas, the different stories, but fantastic. So hats off to you, Richard Donner. Thank you so much for what you've done, what you've given us. It's an amazing feat that you've accomplished in your lifetime, and I don't know many others who could accomplish what you've done. I'm tripping over my words. I can't find the appropriate way to give him a send off. Many have done a better job. Trust me. This is just my little version of thank you. May you rest in peace, sir. And thank you for all the hard work. Speaking of movies, I'm going to transition over. I was ready to talk about Marvel, so might as well talk about Black Widow, starring Scarlett Johansson. I don't want to get the other lady's name incorrect. I know I'm going to get the last name. Florence Pugh, I believe it is. Pugh, P-U-G-H. Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh, David Harbour, and Rachel Weisz. Black Widow was delayed from its original release date of May of 2020, I believe. Obviously, pandemic played a big role into that. But they were trying to find a appropriate time to release the film. At one point, it was going to be released in November of 2020, and then it was pushed back even further. They said maybe April, and then they pushed it back a little further. And then they finally settled on July, the week after July 4th, which is a very smart idea as far as I'm concerned, or at least in my opinion. And then we were finally able to see Black Widow, but for the first time, Black Widow, or I should say a Disney movie for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was going to have the ability to not only be released in theaters because things were opening up, thankfully, to the restrictions being rolled back, but it was also going to be put on Premier Access for Disney Plus members. So you're paying your subscription to Disney Plus, whatever, I think it was like $10 a month, something like that. Don't quote me. I don't remember off the top of my head, but you pay your regular subscription, then you would pay an extra $30 on top of that for Premier Access, so you can watch the movie as many times as you want in the comfort of your home. Nowadays, a lot of people have souped up home theaters, little home setups, so you don't have to leave the comfort of your home to go watch a movie. That was before the pandemic. We were saying, oh, people aren't going to the movies anymore. Why would they go home out of their homes? They've got big screens, they've got the sound bar, they've got the stereo system, they can just enjoy it in their own houses. They can just make some popcorn and you're good to go. They don't have to come to us anymore. This was a very big test to see what they could do, because now you have the streaming service, which has changed things dramatically, but now you also have them being released in theaters at the same time, which the theaters really don't like that. I mean, it cuts into their profits more or less. You go to a movie theater, was it like $10-12 for a ticket nowadays, and then you buy your overpriced popcorn, your overpriced soda, your overpriced M&Ms, whatever the case is. And I get it, it's capitalism, the theaters have to make money, that's why the prices are jacked up, so they can have somewhat of a margin they can work with, because they make only so much off the films itself. They really make the money off the concession stands. All right, let's not get too far into that. I get it, I see why they do it, but I also see why people would stay home. I'll fess up. Whenever I go to the theater, I'll sometimes swing by the convenience store, pick up some M&Ms, put them in my back pocket, and walk in after buying a ticket, and I'll buy a soda. I'm not going to be a complete dick, but that was my ritual. I would go to the movies, I would enjoy all the films, and this is the first MCU movie which I had a chance to watch. Not in my home. We were actually fortunate enough that we were invited over to a family member's home who they have a nice little setup. Again, during the pandemic, they reworked their basement, so they have nice reclining chairs, projection screens on the wall. It was a nice setup. The stereo system was for the room that we were in. It worked it was very lovely. But it was weird because at one point I looked around and I realized that I was not in a theater, like I was in a home setting. I'm like, this is okay. I mean, this is not what I'm used to as far as watching a movie in the theaters, but obviously we're not there. So it was a little bit different. But the movie itself overall, after a year of a delay and finally getting a chance to watch what they've been holding on to, like, I feel so bad. I feel so bad for Scarlett Johansson and the rest of the crew, as far as the actors and the people who made the movie, because they had to hold on to this story, this secret, more or less, for over a year because if you film it, you go through the editing process and everything else, and then you're about to release it, and then all of a sudden the world shuts down. Now you have to sit on this story. You have to keep it to yourself. Don't talk about it. Don't say anything to anybody, and wait until it's released. And then finally, once the story is out there, you're like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to tell her story. If you've not watched any of the Marvel movies, Black Widow is a spy espionage character that initially was trained in what's called the Red Room, so that they would become one of the most deadly assassins to go out there and do a lot of black ops missions, usually on the wrong side of the law, but usually under the notice of any government. So like a lot of backroom stuff that you're not supposed to know about. But eventually the character of Natasha Romanoff wants to do right and get away from the horrible things that she was put through to become this deadly operative. So eventually this tells the story of what she did to become a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers, so she can defect more or less and try to right the wrongs that she had committed throughout her life. The beginning of the movie is fucking heartbreaking. Like the runaway sequence of when the family is like, oh crap, we gotta go, we're being tracked, whatever the case is. I really don't want to spoil anything for anybody. I know it's almost a week now since the movie's been out, but I don't want to get into the finer details. But they do a great job of tugging at your heartstrings in different scenes, where you realize the hurt and the pain that Natasha has gone through, and why she wants to leave the Red Room and get away from the people who trained her. If you go back and watch the first Avengers movie, there's a scene between Black Widow and Loki where they drop a name, Dreykov, where Black Widow's referring to the fact that she wants to right all the different wrongs. She says that she wants to get the red out of her ledger, which is, just trying to say right the wrongs or make up for all the deaths that she's caused. And at one point, Loki looks at her with a knowing look. Like the fact that the character of Loki knew this back then and says Dreykov's daughter. And it was just left at that. It was like a throwaway line that you would think. But Marvel movie makers have done a really, really good job of taking those little loose plot points, those loose ends, and tying them up. Sometimes nicely, so other times leaves you wanting a little bit. But we finally get that years later, where we see what she did, what Dreykov's daughter means to Natasha, what it means to the Red Room, and how she has to try to right that wrong. The action sequences are great. The introduction of Taskmaster, the character, was different from the comics, but I gotta say, I really, really enjoyed what they did with it. They gave you the idea early on that Taskmaster in the comics has how they listed it in the comics, photo reflexes, I think it's called. Essentially, whatever the character of Taskmaster, whatever he could see, he would mimic in the comics. So if he saw Spider-Man swinging down, a street in New York on a web and doing flips and kicks, whatever the case is, he can do that no problem. If you saw Captain America throw a shield, he can do the same thing. If you saw Hawkeye do marksman shots, he can do the same thing. It's the idea that he can mimic anybody's combat or fighting styles. It was a great little gimmick for the character. Remember one of the stories that I read, he goes and he watches somebody playing dice at a casino, and he's watching them as they throw a 7. And the nuance of he can just pick up those same dice or any pair of dice at that point and do the same movement, because he can remember the movement of the other character's physiology, where he can mimic and throw a 7 pretty much all day. So he can just break the house as far as gambling is concerned. Nice little touch. I don't know how true it is in the comics all the time. It depends on who writes the character and how they want to use him. But Taskmaster in the movie is a little bit different, where they have the character learn things, but if you see the character's helmet, there's like a camera in the visor, but right above the eyes, essentially where the third eye would be, on for those spiritually inclined. And what they talk about is that Taskmaster gets video footage reviewed constantly and then uploaded through a port in the back of the helmet, and then Taskmaster can mimic or mirror anybody that Taskmaster sees as far as fights, running or jumping, whatever the case is. So when you see Taskmaster, there's that one scene in the trailer where Black Widow goes to kip up or nip up, whatever it's called nowadays. Taskmaster mimics that exactly. So when they sit there, you're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Some of the other scenes that you see, he mimics Hawkeye at one point, shooting an arrow. Same stance, same pose. Captain America, he also carries a shield. I don't know if it was a vibranium, but was definitely wielded the same way that Captain America would wield his shield, and also pick it up by like doing like almost like a skateboard kick up so we can catch it. Who else? Black Widow, Black Panther. At one point, you see the claws come out on the gauntlets for Taskmaster, and they reference at one point in the trailer. I know you saw almost like a Spider-Man type swing or jump maneuver. So again, all the different characters. So imagine a character fighting you that has the culmination of a lot of the Avengers roster as far as fighting moves and abilities. So long as it's not something that needs an external piece of equipment. Let's say he can't fire webs because he doesn't have the formula for Spider-Man's web shooters. Can mimic Iron Man's armor because that's a weapon in of itself. But all the different combat moves Taskmaster can mimic or mirror in the movie. And it was a very, very cool addition, the way they brought the character in, the way it was portrayed. It also ties into the story of Dreykov's Red Room. It's very, very interesting. And again, we talk about the Red Room. We learn what the Red Room is more in depth, and the idea that all these girls that Dreykov would find, whether it be homeless or runaways, abandoned, whatever the case was, he would take them in, train them, and I believe it was said 1 in 20 would actually survive the program. The others he would kill or just do away with, which was heartbreaking. In the opening credits, where they do the slow tempoed version of Nirvana's "Smells Like Teen Spirit," I can't remember who did the cover, but it was a very haunting rendition of it. The song itself from Nirvana is amazing, but slowing it down, a lower tempo. It was, for the opening credits, it just, again, tugs at your heartstrings. But as you go through the film, and we get to see Black Widow, or Natasha, we get to see her younger sister, played by Florence, let's see here, character of Yelena Belova, another character from the comics. We got to see the Red Guardian, played by David Harbour, Alexei, and then we got to see Melina, played by Rachel Weisz, who is a reference, and I didn't know this until much later, the Iron Maiden character in the comics. I'm not really familiar with that one, but we got to see the family reunion for Natasha and what she had before the Avengers. Granted, it was a setup. The whole family was fake. Alexei and Melina were put into this fake marriage with these kids, and were just told to go live in the United States and live under these identities in deep cover until they were called back home, essentially. That just plays out in such a very, very interesting way that finally gives a lot of nuance and layers to Black Widow's character and her past. And again, if you haven't watched the movies, the sacrifice that she eventually makes in Endgame, which I have to imagine you've seen the movie at this point, because if you haven't seen Endgame, considering how big the movie was in theaters when it was released, and that at one point it was the highest grossing movie of all time, I believe Avatar has reclaimed that title. We have to know at this point that Black Widow made a sacrifice to try to get the one stone off of Vormir, and in doing that gave up her life and wiped out whatever red was left in her ledger. I would imagine so. I mean, you make the ultimate sacrifice. How do you not balance the scales for a character? But that's up for debate, I guess. But so all this movie takes place after Captain America Civil War, I believe, for the most part, because the character of Black Widow is on the run. So is Steve Rogers. They mentioned at one point early in the movie that they already have Hawkeye, Falcon, and Ant-Man have already been arrested and are federal custody. So we see those play out in different stories and different movies leading up to Infinity War and Endgame. But we get to see what Natasha does on the run. And a lot of people were saying, well, I was hoping at the end some of the other characters would show up and we'd get some of the previously introduced characters in the MCU. But why? Why would you want that? This was such a great independent solo story. The problem when you get a lot of these characters into big team-ups, like the Avengers, you name it at this point, Avengers Age of Ultron, and Infinity War Endgame. Those are big team-up movies. Those are movies where you bring all the characters together, or like they did with the different Captain America movies, the Winter Soldier and Civil War. Civil War was a great, that battle scene in the Germany airport, good guys versus good guys. It's amazing that you can make that happen and get that played out on screen. But the problem that you run into with some of these solo movies is you say, you live in a world with so many different superheroes. Why don't you just call on the Hulk? Why don't you call on Captain America? Why don't you call on, whatever the case is, run down the roster of different names. You've got to find a way to nullify those other characters so they don't play into this storyline that you're trying to tell, because it makes the character stronger. It shows you what the character can do. People are saying, we're going to watch, one of the weakest Avengers. Come on, guys. We're talking about superhero movies in general. Yes, Black Widow is a trained assassin. She can't lift a car and throw it. She can't fly. She doesn't shoot laser beams out of her eyes, although she does shoot stun bolts or stun pulses out of her wrist mounts. Yes, this is a human character, but you've got to play within those confines and make the character work in that story. And for this movie, spy, espionage, action thriller, it worked out really well. By the end of the film, I was kind of surprised what they did with it, but I was also, in a sense, I was kind of let down because I know what happens to the character later on. So, okay, this gives the character closure in a sense, because now we get to see what they did on the side. It's like a side quest in a sense, not to demean what what it means to the character overall. Just saying that we get to see, while this big story is playing on over here, we get to see what this story does on this side of the tracks. So seeing that in tandem with how the rest of the MCU works so far, it's interesting and nice to see those all play out, because now we get a bit more of the MCU fleshed out. We get some more characters introduced, and hopefully we'll get to see some more. David Harbour's Red Guardian was a fun character to watch. He was played for a lot of comedy relief and was more like a wrecking ball through most of the movie. It's fine. Let's see more of that. The character of Melina, Rachel Weisz's character, who had a large hand in the Red Room and the training. I would love to see that character come back. And of course, we're going to see Yelena Belova, because at this point, it looks like she's going to be taking over the mantle of Black Widow. Especially if you see, this is kind of a spoiler, so if you haven't watched the movie yet, here we go. The last scene, the ending credit scene, the bonus scene for Black Widow, Yelena talks to Valentina de Allegra Fontaine, I hope I'm getting that right, Val, who's more or less Lady Hydra. It looks like she is recruiting different versions of superheroes. So we saw her already in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. She was recruiting Walker, so she's getting U.S. Agent. At this point, she's going after Black Widow, and she had one other one. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head now. But essentially, we're seeing a version of the Dark Avengers being formed in these little bonus scenes or little side scenes. So we're going to see Florence Pugh come back and reprise the character, which would be nice to see going forward, because her character, she has some great lines in the movie itself. It was such a, I don't want to say laid back, but she was such a, it was nice to see the sister relationship, the sibling relationship between Natasha and Yelena, because they grew up together, but they really didn't have like that real family dynamic, but they still you're pretty much the closest thing I have to a sister. It was interesting to see how they played off each other. So it was really great to see that on film, and I would love to see more of Yelena's character play more into the MCU, which I'm sure we're going to see tons of. Let's face it, Kevin Feige has got this whole thing in his head and a room full of writers, and they're all doing their things, and hopefully it all plays out really, really well, because there's a lot of stuff going on right now. But we'll see. I don't want to get too far into this, because, I mean, by myself, I can just keep going on and on. I'm sure I probably started a few talking points and forgotten here and there. If I did, let me know. If you have any Richard Donner stories, also send those in. Let me know what's going on, and let me know what you thought about Black Widow. Again, I enjoyed it. I get to watch it at home. I do want to go back to the theater and watch more Marvel movies in the theater, only because it just feels like that's traditional. I know Kevin Feige at one point was interviewed, and he goes, no, whenever we make a movie, we make it with a packed theater in mind. And if you want to know what he's talking about when he says that, go back to Avengers Endgame, that one scene where Captain America picks up Mjolnir, and he has this shield and Thor's hammer in his hand, and the crowd absolutely loses it. That and the whole, on your left, and all the different portals are opening up as all the returning heroes are coming back after the snap is reversed. Amazing stuff. So that's a good idea of what they want to recreate over and over again. We're not going to get those all the time, obviously, but those moments, those special moments that you share with strangers in a theater, I kind of miss those. I really do. So it would be nice to get back together to get to that point again, where we could do that, but hopefully we'll see. We'll see how the world pans out right now. If you want to send anything in, rabblecast@gmail.com is the email you can hit me at. Rabblecast on Twitter. Let's see what else. It's been a while. Give me a second here. If you're not following the Rabblecast Facebook fan page, hit that up. I try to post up some different stories, links, so obviously whenever the show itself goes up. I think that's it. No, that's not it. Rabblecast.libsyn.com for the show itself. I'm trying to work on the show page a little bit. We'll get to that and we'll see what's going on. And obviously, we are brought to you by InsidePulse.com, so go check us out there. I believe that's all for the time being. I'm working on those links, and we'll see how it all pans out. But I think I've talked long enough. So if you made it this far, thank you for listening. We are the Rabblecast.